And welcome to the first mini lesson of Chapter 6. So we just got done with our first unit, I guess you could say, in our first lecture exam. So that was covering Chapters 1, 4, and 5. So now we're moving on into our next body system, which is a skeletal system. We're going to spend a couple chapters focus on the skeletal system. That's Chapter 6, which is bone tissue. Chapter 9, which is articulations, like joints and body movements and things like that. Chapters 7 and 8 go directly along with your bone list. So I am not going to be lecturing directly from those chapters. I don't have PowerPoints or note outlines for those. You need to be working on memorizing your bone list. I will be making some videos to kind of supplement your lab time, kind of just doing a tour of your bone list with actual bone models. So I'll be posting those shortly. So for Chapter 6, it's mainly bone tissue, kind of microscopic and macroscopic views, and then we'll take a look at bone formation as well as fracture and repair, and the disease process of osteoporosis. We'll finish up with that. So for this first mini lesson, just an introduction, taking a look at, we'll look at some bone shapes and what we call bone markings and just structure in general of long bones and flat bones. But first, just going through the note outline here that we have, since this is our first lecture of the skeletal system, just to talk about what are the functions of the skeletal system. We'll see that's a pattern I usually follow where when we start a new system, I introduce the functions of that system before we jump into all of the details of that system. So first, obviously, is support. So your bones hold up your body. They support your softer tissues. Storage of minerals and nutrients. So what do you think the primary mineral of bones stored in bones? Calcium. Yep. What about a nutrient? That's going to be fat. A lot of your marrow inside your marrow cavities is yellow marrow, which is primarily adipose tissue. So we store calcium and some phosphates, minerals in our bone matrix itself, and then yellow marrow can be stored in the hollow spaces within the bones. Blood cell production is also a function of your skeletal system in general, but more specifically, it is of the marrow, the red marrow that's found in certain locations of your skeleton. And I'll be talking about where that is a little bit. This is red blood cells and white blood cells and platelets are manufactured in the red marrow of your bone spaces. Protection, right? Our skull protects our brain, our rib cage protects our heart and lungs. Our vertebral column protects our spinal cord, so these hard bony structures protect the softer, more delicate, really important organs of our body. And then lastly, leverage. Our skeletal muscle is attached to our skeleton. So when we move our body, it is the muscles attached to our bones that cause our body to move. So those are the functions of the skeletal system as a whole. So support, storage of minerals and lipids, blood cell production, protection, and leverage. All right. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and jump into the details of our skeletal system. So first of all, do you know how many bones are in an adult human skeleton? Like a Jeopardy question. What is 206 bones, Alex? Yeah. So there's 206 individual bones in an adult skeleton. What about in a baby, a newborn? More or less the same? What do you think? There are actually about 300 bones, give or take, in a newborn. And the reason why is because bones don't fully ossify or become hard and calcified until various points in childhood development. And you don't get a fully ossified or calcified, I should say, skeleton until you're about your mid-20s. So some of you, if you're younger than 25, you still may have bones that are partly cartilage and have not quite calcified yet. So we'll be taking a look at that as we go through the mini lesson on ossifications, different kinds of ossification processes. All right, so bone shapes is the first thing we're going to take a look at. Okay, so let's take a look at some bone shapes. There's 6 categories that your book illustrates here in this diagram, and I have some models here that I'll be showing with these. So I'm actually going to skip sutural bones for now because that's for this, I'm not going to start with sutural bones. I'm actually going to start with the letter E there on this picture with long bones. And so they're showing a humerus, but I'm going to show you the femur. The femur is the largest bone in your body. So this is your thigh bone. Okay. So long bones are longer than they are, there we go. So they are longer than they are wide. So most of your appendage bones are long bones. Here's your tibia. So this is your other lower, this is your lower, one of your lower leg bones. This is your radius. This is one of your forearm bones. So all of these are examples of long bones. We also have long bones. There's a spotlight. The sun's shining in my window. So these finger bones are also long bones. Even though they might be relatively short compared to other bones, these are all long bones. They are the bones of your hand. So these are called metacarpals. And the bones of your fingers, these are called phalanges. So palm bones, finger bones, same with your foot and your toe bones, those are all long bones. Compare that to short bones, which is letter C here in this picture. Short bones are your carpal bones in your wrist and your tarsal bones in your foot or your ankle area. So these are all called short bones. So long bones of the hand and fingers and your other appendages like humerus, radius, ulna, femur, tibia, fibula. And then you're only going to find short bones here in the carpals of your wrist and the tarsals of your foot. So they're more cube shaped, kind of blocky. So those are your carpals. Okay. Then we have flat bones. So I just have, the skull, right? This will just sit like right here, the skull cap. So this is the frontal bone here. And you can see it's pretty flat. It's very thin. These are the parietal bones right here, which are going to sit right here. And then in my bag of bones, this is our scapula. So the scapula is your shoulder blade. So you can see it's also quite flat. So those are examples of flat bones. All right, and then we have irregular bones. So irregular bones don't really fit into the category of long, short, or flat. So some of your skull bones are irregular. So I'm going to show you the inside of the skull. So we'll be learning about these. We have the ethmoid bone, ethmoid bone, sphenoid bone, occipital bone here. We have some vertebrae. Okay. So this is an irregular bone. It doesn't really fit in any of those other categories. Okay. Irregular bones. So your vertebrae and some bones in our skull. And our pelvis, right? Here's one of our hip bones. It has kind of a flat piece to it right here. This is called the ilium, but the rest of it doesn't really fit into any of those categories. So this would be a hip bone. There's your socket for your femur right there. Okay. All right, so those are the major categories where most of our bones are going to be fitting into those categories. The other two smaller ones, we have the sesamoid, which is basically your kneecap. Here's my bag of bones. Let me see if I can find real quick the sesamoid. It's probably down way at the bottom. There we go. So this is your sesamoid. This is your kneecap. It kind of looks like a sesame seed, I guess. You only have two of those. And then we have sutural bones. I don't think my skull shows a sutural bone, but sutures are these seams, basically, the seams between all your skull bones. And so sometimes a little bone will develop in those seams, and those are called sutural bones. All right. In our colored skulls in lab, you'll be able to see those a lot better because they're painted clearly to stand out from the other bones. So those are the general shapes of bones: long, short, flat, irregular, sutural, and sesamoid. Okay. The next slide that you'll see, and we have this also in lab, and I'll talk more about the details of your recommendations for this one, bone markings. On your bone list, you have bone names with their associated markings, and you have to learn everything on that list, inside and out, upside down, front ways, back ways, however you want to call it. But I don't necessarily need you to memorize the definitions of these bone markings. So for example, I usually use this as a, where's the word I'm looking for? Tuberosity, right here. So the word tuberosity, the definition says a rough projection. Well, that's a pretty vague definition. What I'm more concerned is that you know where all of your tuberosities are, I should say. So I'm going to show you a few of those. So you can see that there really is a difference between the appearance of these tuberosities, even though they're all called a tuberosity. So on your tibia, this is kind of the top of your lower leg, your femur is going to sit right here, right? Just like this. So your kneecap would sit here. See this bump right here? That's called the tibial tuberosity. So yeah, it's a rough projection, kind of sticks out a little bit. Here's your radius. This is the forearm bone that sits right on your thumb, by your thumb side of your forearm, right there. See that bump? Oop, there. Going in the camera, it's backwards. It's like a mirror. So this is called the radial tuberosity. And you can see it's also kind of a rough bump, but it doesn't look anything like the tibial tuberosity, but they're both called tuberosities. Here in the picture, they're showing what's called the deltoid tuberosity. So this is your humerus, this is your upper arm bone. So this would be my right arm bone like this. This rough end right here, it doesn't even stick out at all. It's just like a rough patch. That's called the deltoid tuberosity. So again, we have three tuberosities. They don't look anything alike, but they're still called a tuberosity. So I just need you to know that this is called the deltoid tuberosity. This is called the radial tuberosity, and this is called the tibial tuberosity because these are all the things that are listed on your bone list. So again, I'm not so concerned about the definitions of these things, but you need to know what they are. And you might start getting some familiarity with the marking terms when you are working through your bone list. So for example, the word foramen, you're going to see foramen a lot. And every time you see foramen, it's going to be pointing to a hole. Okay, so here is a hole called the mental foramen. Here is a hole called the infraorbital foramen. Here are some holes inside the eye socket. Those are all foramen. There's lots of holes inside the skull, and they all have the word foramen. So after you've seen the word foramen a gazillion times and see that it's always associated with a hole, a foramen is a hole, so it's, or foramen, however you want to call it. Or a fossa. A fossa is a dent. It's like a shallow depression. And so you're going to see lots of fossas. They might look different, but you'll start connecting the word fossa with the indentation. So you'll kind of pick up on these definitions as you start memorizing your bone list, but I don't need you to memorize the actual definitions of each one of these. Use it as more of a resource than something to memorize. Use your bone list as what you need to memorize. Okay, and then lastly, for this introductory video, I wanted to go over bone structure, primarily just the two different types of kind of shapes of bones, if you will. I know we did all the shapes, but I want to talk about the difference between long bone anatomy and flat bone anatomy. So yes, we have long bones and short bones, but long bones have special regions or special areas that we need to know the names of, just more vocabulary. So the femur is really big. I might show the femur on this screen, but I might use the humerus as my visual aid here because it can fit on the screen a little bit better. So when you're taking a look at long bone anatomy, you have the two ends, right? So the two bulky ends of the bones, these are called the epiphyses, right? Or epiphysis for singular, epiphyses for plural. So these are just the bulky ends. And then the shaft of the bone, the long skinny part, is called the diaphysis. Okay, so you've got two epiphyses right here, and then diaphysis is the shaft. And then metaphysis, these areas right here in the middle, they are just the connector. So here's the epiphyses, metaphysis, and then diaphysis is the shaft, all right? So just, you might see epiphyseal, diaphysis, metaphyseal, those are like descriptive words for those regions of the bone. So epiphyses, diaphysis, metaphysis, kind of a little connector, all right? And then inside, if I were to slice this bone open, which I don't have that model, we do have one in the lab, you'll see in the epiphysis, These long bones are filled with what we call spongy bone, and we're going to talk about the difference between compact and spongy bone in the next video. So your epiphyses are filled with spongy bone, and then the diaphysis is hollow in the middle, filled with marrow, and so the space is called a medullary or marrow cavity, and then surrounding it all over here, this is all compact bone, right? So we have spongy bone and compact bone, and then the marrow cavity is inside the diaphysis, okay? So those are all the words that go along with a long bone. And then for a flat bone, right, so they're showing bones of the skull, but I could easily just slice through the scapula here. And we also have compact bone and spongy bone, but they just have some slightly different words and when they're associated with a flat bone. So the compact bone, outer edge is called the cortex, right? Cortex we saw in the hair, it's just the outer layer. And then the spongy bone inside, if I were to slice this open and see what you can see on the picture, that spongy bone is called diploe. Diploe. It's just the collection of all of the branchy network of the spongy bone. Okay, so that's our long bone anatomy and our flat bone anatomy. So next video, we're going to take a look at some cells in the histology and compact bone and spongy bone of bone. All right, so I'll see you next time. Bye.